Hello students. Uh, Today we will be talking about a very important aspect of management in an organization. And to understand first what is the aspect of the planning per se, which is very, very important. So here we talk about, a manager's primary challenge, as you all know, is to solve problems creatively, while drawing from a variety of academic disciplines. And to help managers respond to the challenge of this creative problem solving, the principle of management has been categorized into four major functions. So we give it an acronym of POLC framework, wherein the P stands for planning, O is for organizing, leading, and controlling. Uh, when we talk about planning as a component, now it is a process which consists of several steps. The process generally begins with an environmental scanning, which simply means that planners must be aware of the critical contingencies which their organizations are facing, more or less, in terms of economic conditions, their competitors, who are their competitors, more about their customers. So the planner has to make an attempt to forecast future conditions. These forecasts form the basis for planning. So it is, a function of management which involves setting of objectives, determining a course of action for achieving those objectives. Now, when we talk about planning, a very important component is that we have to take into account that it involves setting of certain very specific objectives for future course of action. So here it requires, that managers have to be aware of those conditions. So as I stated earlier, it is very important and relevant that planners must understand that they have to establish objectives which are really statements of what needs to be achieved and when it has to be done. Planners must then identify the alternative course of action to achieve those objectives. So, after a very careful evaluation of the various alternatives, they take decisions. I'm talking about the managers here. They take decisions about the best course of action for achieving those objectives. Uh, in order to do that, they must formulate necessary steps and ensure effective implementation of plans. So they have to really, constantly evaluate the success of their plans and take necessary corrective actions as and when required. Now, when we talk about this, understanding of what is the reason to plan. So we all know, we all understand that there are a lot of changes which keep happening in the environment because it is a very volatile environment. It is very dynamic in nature. So as managers, you engage in planning and you understand that what is it actually that you are focused on doing. So as planners, as managers, you understand that your planning should provide a direction. The direction, the focus area is something which is, expected from you. Understanding that the planning should be able to really minimize waste and redundancy. Now, whenever we talk about effective management as a concept, we always say that it has to be effective and efficient. So in order to understand that the efficiency aspect is taken care of, the redundancy and the wastage has to be really, taken into account, that it is controlled. So as planners, you also, your plan has to understand that it has to set certain standards in order to facilitate the control mechanism. So if you say that this is how the process should run, or this is how a program should run in a company, in an organization, how do you ensure that it has actually run the way you desire it to be? So as a proper manager, you understand, you create certain benchmarks, you create certain standards, and then you map it. Whatever has the program has taken place, you map it, whether it is actually going as per the requirement, as per the standards which have been set or no. Reducing the impact of change is very, very important, because any kind of change, whether it is a change in a government policy, rules and regulation, it can be a legal change, it can also be pertaining to a technological change. Now, as effective managers, as planners, one should understand that it is in your hand how to, control the impact or influence of that change. Because you have to see and take into account that these kind of changes should not be hard hitting your organization in a manner that it disturb the equilibrium. I mean, it would definitely, but to what extent can you really keep a track of it? To what extent can you manage that? That should be under your control. Okay, moving ahead now, we say that planning is, generally said, it's kind of an exercise which determines. Now, these are very, very, specific, I would say, functions per se. So it says what is to be done or achieved. Now here, when we are talking about what is to be done or achieved, we are actually focusing upon the ends. The ends, that is the ulterior goal the organization has. So somewhere we always relate to this goal in terms of a vision statement. Now, every organization will definitely have a vision statement, because a vision statement generally, gives employees something to rally behind. And for those businesses that choose to make their vision statements public, mostly everybody does. So in case you're making it public, it, tells the world where the company is going, and what is the plan of action, what are we looking at in the future. So let's see, if I talk about IKEA, the Swedish multinational group of companies that, designs and sells ready to assemble furniture. So it is driven by its corporate vision. Now the vision of IKEA states, in inverted commas, to create a better everyday life for many people. So it's actually somewhere very clearly telling you that this is what the end goal is. This is what the ulterior motive is. This is what IKEA stands for. When we talk about the second aspect, the how part, how it is to be done. The how aspect is something which is called as the mission statement. Now, mission statement tells you the roadmap. Mission statement tells you, as you can see, the how aspect. And it, basically outlines how the business will turn its mission into a reality. And it becomes the foundation for establishing specific goals and objectives. So if we consider IKEA again, now I'll read out the vision statement again. The vision says to create a better everyday life for many people. So to take it further, the mission of IKEA states to offer a wide range of well-designed, functional home furnishing products at prices so low that as many people as possible will be able to afford it. So it is this mission that enables them to realize their vision of better everyday life. So if you can understand, it is really in continuation, the mission or the means is in continuation of the vision statement, that is the end. The timing part, coming down to the timing part, now this is very important and relevant because it says the when aspect, when to do what. So you can have your vision statement, it's a very futuristic statement. Your mission statement tells you the how aspect. But then how do we take into account that what is the deadline for us? So if I consider the mission statement of IKEA, which says that I need to, design functional, home furnishing products for at low prices. When aspect is what is the timeline which has been set for us? That is also taken into account when we plan properly. Responsibility and accountability is very relevant because who is actually going to execute it? That is also a plan of action which needs to be prepared definitely very much in advance. Why is it to be done? I'm sorry. The reason is also something which has to be very, clearly stated, the why aspect. Why do we need to do it? What is the reason? Why are we, talking about something like making the life of everyone better by, designing ready to assemble furniture? So the why aspect also somewhere defines very clearly your plan of action. Okay. Moving ahead now, what you see here is, so this is very clearly telling you that this is where we are. And if we want to move up the ladder, if we want to move ahead, and we want to say that this is where we plan to go, that really focuses and talks about the strategic plan. In the coming slides, we will be talking more about the different types of planning. We will be touching upon this concept. But here, just to make things little clear to you, the where aspect is definitely related to the how aspect. So I can say that I want to do this, I aim to do this, I want to retain the best talent in my organization. But how is it that I plan to do? I plan to, deliver the best apparels to the segment of females, working professionals. But how do I do it? What is my business plan? The how aspect. So more or less, if you see, the planning really takes into account both the aspects. That is the strategic aspect as well as the execution aspect. Okay. Now, this is a very, very important component to be understood very clearly. So this is an exhibit which has been taken from Stephen Robbins from the 11th edition. Now, here what you see in his book, he has very clearly stated that there are different types of plans, and he has divided, categorized it in accordance with something called as breadth, uh, time frame, specificity, and the frequency of usage. So more or less, if we talk about the breadth aspect, so I'll just go back to the previous slide here. And, if you remember very clearly, so the previous slide spoke of the strategic and the operational aspect, as I told you. So strategic planning really, involves competitive opportunities and threats, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of the organization, because it is required in determining how to position the organization to compete effectively in their environment. So it becomes really relevant. Strategic plan mostly, has a long time frame, sometimes 3 years or more, and it generally, most of the time, it includes the entire organization and also formulation of certain objectives. Sorry, it is based on the fundamental reason for existence of an organization, because here the top management mostly is the one which is actually conducting the strategic plan. The top management, the higher level, the C-suite as we call them. Strategic plans mostly, translate the company's mission into a set of long-term goals and certain short-term objectives. In the process of determining any company's strategic plan, the top level managers mostly, they look out to answer certain questions. Now, the questions are categorized as, let's say, where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we get there? Why do we want to go there? Things like that. When I talk about the operational plan, now this is generally assuming the existence of organization-wide or sub-unit goals and objectives, and it also specifies ways to achieve them. What would be the way, how to go about it, how to execute the strategic plan. So it is like a short range, short range plan that is designed to develop specific action steps, very, very clear cut action steps that support the strategic and tactical plans. So it has to really, go in integration with the strategic aspect. Sometimes, the operational plan also establish detailed standards that guide the implementation of the strategic plan, and they also establish the activities and budgets for each part of the organization. So that is their relevance. Sorry. They may go sometimes as far as to get schedules and standards also set for the day-to-day operations of any business, and the names responsible who are related to it, the supervisors, the departments, etc. So that is more or less related to the implementation aspect. Okay, now when we move ahead, we talk about the time frame aspect. So time frame, as you can see, has been divided into long term and short term. So on the basis of this time period, we see the long-term plans. Generally, they are beyond 5 years, sometimes more than 3 years also. They are called as long-term plans. And they specify mostly what the organization wants to become in a longer run. That is in the future, let's say more than 3 years, more than 5 years. The long-term plan generally involves great sense of uncertainty. Now that is very, very important, because if you're planning for so much of future, it's very unpredictable. You cannot say really what is going to happen. So that is why we take into account like that. And mostly higher management levels generally focus on a longer time horizons, so that variety of things can be spoken of for those long-term plans. Some examples, just to give you certain examples, they can be related to the training aspect. They can be related to the understanding that this is where we want to diversify, or let's say expand our market. So mostly businesses talk about diversification, mostly they talk about expansion, geographical expansions, etc. Then we talk about the next, that is the short-term planning. The short-term planning is mostly, in a time frame of 1 year or maybe less also, sometimes 1.5 years, like that. It provides a very clear-cut basis for the day-to-day operations. That if I'm looking at expansion, geographical expansion, the short-term plan will tell me that this is what we should be doing in the next quarter. So quarter one, this is the plan. Quarter two, this is what we propose to do. Those kind of things. They meet a particular objective in the near future mostly because they answer certain questions like, are we doing it right? Are we on the right path? It should fit well within the long-term aspect. So if I'm planning to diversify, my short-term plan more or less should be covering that aspect. So that is the short-term plan. Now talking about the next component, that is the specificity. So here if you see, it has been divided into two components, two aspects, that is directional and specific. Now directional plans are generally very flexible because they are more or less like general guidelines. And they kind of, they are preferred in a dynamic environment mostly because management has to be flexible in order to respond to unexpected changes. So they are guidelines. They are more or less that, you can do that. However, if we go to the second aspect of the specific plan, now they are very clearly defined objective and they leave no room for interpretation. So it's very, very clearly stated. It's more or less like a, it's a mandate. It's more in terms of compliance that you cannot interpret it as per your understanding. It is very clear. Directional provides you a roadmap. Then the next aspect where we differentiate on the frequency of usage, we say it's either a single use plan or it is a standing plan. Now, mostly when I talk about a standing plan, they are very clearly focusing on organizational situations that occur repeatedly. So standing plans generally talk about policies, standard procedures, rules and regulations for the organization that if this situation comes, this is how we need to act or react. So that's a standing plan. Single use is generally to activities that do not occur or repeat at the same time in the future, and it is mostly relevant for a very specified time, or after the lapse of that time the plans are formulated again. So single use is making a plan for, let's say, a very specific time period, that if it's a work from home, then this is what has to be done. So it's a single use. Later on when it happens, then the management revisits the plan again. It tries to come up, it tries to implement it, it tries to do some kind of modifications in that. Okay, now as you see here that the strategic and the operational planning has been very clearly divided in terms of the level of managers. So the first level of managers here, what you see, they mostly the first and the middle level managers, they talk about the operational plans, the execution and the implementation aspect. But when you move up the ladder, when you go to the senior level, the top executive level, they generally speak about, they are the ones who are mostly involved in the strategic plan, because it's at that level where certain kind of policies are made, certain kind of guidelines are prepared, future plans are made. So generally the top officials are the ones who get involved with it. Process of planning is very intricate. It is very detailed and very important to understand, because the important, the ladders and the stages are something which are mostly followed when certain kind of futuristic plans are made, certain kind of short-term plans are made also at that time. Generally managers take this into account. So starting with the first one, establishment of objectives. Now this is the first step here where the objectives and the goals are being set up. So, any business enterprise needs certain objectives to work upon for. We all know that, because, managers need them, they need to have a clarity, because if they state these objectives very clearly, the right direction can be taken to achieve these goals. So, stating them very clearly becomes very important. Moreover, they are stated in a plan must sync at all the levels in the organization, whether it is higher level, middle level, lower level, because it provides a direction to individual departments and units also, as they need to have a clarity that they can work towards the achievement of those objectives. Unless the goals are not defined, the function of the management cannot move forward. Moving to the second part, that is developing premises. Now, we all know that, planning is mostly based on certain assumptions regarding the future. These assumptions are more or less called as premises. They are situations, they can be some kind of future projections. They are regarding the previous plan and the current policies and facts. They can be at managers at all levels of the organization are involved in the planning, and they should follow the same assumption. They are very important for the organization because they decide the path for the plan to be made, so it cannot be neglected. For a successful plan, these correct premises need to be proposed very clearly. Then we go towards the understanding of the identification and evaluation, mostly that how it has to be done. So once the objectives and assumptions are developed, need arises mostly to identify the different course of action that can be followed. So there can be a number of ways to achieve a defined objective. I mean, it is innumerable. There are many. So here the manager needs to think very carefully about these routes, the different kind of routes one has. This involves innovation and creative mind so that new ways can be developed in order to accomplish the goals. When I talk about the evaluation aspect, after identifying the different paths of action, the manager needs to very clearly evaluate them and see whether the evaluation is based on the utility and the consequences of the options. Now that is very, very important and relevant. Managers must definitely assess the pros and cons of each alternative. For example, let's say which route will incur less cost or which option can help the organization in achieving the goals in lesser time. So we understand that which is the better option. In light of such, the right evaluation of the different alternative has to be done, and managers try to take an understanding which is the best route to follow. Okay. Now, when we move up and when we talk about the formulating the plan, and then we talk about how to do the follow-up, etc. So here it's mostly related to the managers using their skills and knowledge for understanding that which is the better option, which is the most viable option, and select the best and the right alternative in terms of profitability, let's say cost and workability, etc. Sometimes a combination of different routes can also be taken. Moving down, if you see the last part, which talks about the review and follow-up. Now, this is important to assess the whole working and implementation of the plans. A continuous supervision of the actions are required because keeping an eye on the activities to be performed is very important for planning per se. The reason is very simple. It helps to ensure the proper working of a plan. So through a follow-up action, it increases the success rate of a plan increases exponentially, and of course the objectives can also be achieved. So ideally speaking, this is a very relevant and a very important component of planning, which helps the managers in not only understand the objectives but also come up with a proper plan of action, and then justifies very clearly whether it is matching up to the expectations or not. Okay, now when we move next, we see that there are different tools and techniques which are available to create proper plans. So environmental scanning is definitely one of the most important tool which we have, because it tells very clearly that what your competitors are doing, what your customers, what do they want, what kind of changes are happening, etc. So when you scan the environment, you can come up with a proper plan of action. Competitor intelligence is relevant because it gives you a very detailed understanding about how can you really, what are your competitors thinking, what kind of strategies they are following, and what kind of customers they are tapping, etc., etc. Then benchmarking is something where you actually standardize. You come up with a standard. You say that we need to set ourselves as per these standards. Now, the benchmarking can be done with respect to an industry, a sector, or even internally, okay, with respect to certain processes. So any kind of quality control standards, if you prepare, that is also benchmarking. Budgeting is relevant because budgeting is more or less, it's a numerical information which tells you very clearly about the costs, the expenditures which are being incurred by the business, what kind of profits are you expecting, etc., etc. So if you have a proper goal in mind, it is always important to have a proper budget, because controlling the expenses and understanding where can those resources be utilized properly is very, very important. Scheduling and project management go hand in hand because here you decide on work allocation, task allocation. There is something called as a Gantt chart which is prepared. Now, Gantt charts mostly are related to the work. They are related to specific individuals. They talk about the profiles, how much work has to be done, per hour working, what needs to be given, the tasks which needs to be finished, etc., etc. So then it becomes very important and relevant. Okay. Management by objectives, MBO as we call it. Now, this is something which is very, very, it's being practiced and it's being followed all across. And we also, as you can say, we call it management by results, MBR. Now, this is given by Peter Drucker. He's the father of modern management. So he says it's like, defining objectives within an organization so that the management and employees have an understanding as to what is their role in achieving them. We say it is systematic and it's a very organized approach because it allows us to focus on certain achievable goals. And mostly if you see that, it involves tracking and feedback to achieve those objectives. MBO as a concept, it's a very, systematic and organized concept which allows to, as you can see, attain the best possible result from the available resources. The aim is to increase organizational performance by, aligning these subordinate objectives throughout the organization with the overall goals that the, management has set. So ideally speaking, now this is a very ideal scenario, employees get strong input in order to identify what is their objective and what are the timelines and so on, how do I achieve them, etc. Because as you can see here, it involves ongoing tracking and feedback. Now this is important because it gives a real-time intervention. It also helps in identifying any kind of deviation, any kind of discrepancy if it is happening. What are the, clear-cut instructions which can be given to minimize those deviations? Those kind of aspects are also covered here. Okay, now it's all about, I'm sorry, it's all about setting goals and then breaking them into very, very specific objectives or key results. Okay, so this is what you see is the company goal, and very clearly it has been segregated department wise. So this can be the finance, the HR and the marketing department. Once they set their departmental objectives or goals, they communicate it at the individual level. So at the every individual who's working on the field will also have a very clear understanding as to what that person is supposed to do. So generally MBOs involve if we talk about it in terms of a process, it involves company-wide goals which are derived from corporate strategy. So these goals are more or less related to the organizational strategy. Determining the team and the department level goals come next in action because here you allocate it department wise. Then very importantly, you have to really collaborate, setting individual goals which should be aligned with the corporate strategy, because this is what the ulterior motive of an MBO is. That as an individual, the goals which are being set here should be in sync with the organization or the company's goal. It should not go in some other direction. And of course, once it is, aligned, you are required to come up with an action plan, and definitely you need to do certain kind of reviews, because then it will be helpful in understanding where the deviations are happening, where we are looking at certain kind of discrepancies. The broader principle, the main principle behind MBO is to make sure that everybody within the organization has a very clear understanding of the organization's goals and aware about their own role and responsibility in achieving objectives, because it will help them in attaining their goals. So until and unless that awareness, that clarity is not there, the work will not be done in the appropriate manner. The complete MBO system, it aims to get managers empowered with, implementing and achieving their plans, because it is actually at the end, it is the organization which is getting benefited out of it. Okay. Now here the concept of smart MBOs comes into account, because MBOs have to be categorized. Now SMART is an acronym for the the ones which are mentioned here. If you can see very clearly that it says it has to be specific, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Now, the MBOs or the objectives should be very specific to the department one, to the individual two. Because if it is not specific, the focus is mainly the MBOs are focusing on aligning the individual goals with the organization's goal. But if it is not made specific, if it is not made very clear, the understanding will not come. Measurable, because if you cannot quantify the objectives, it will be very hard to assess and evaluate the performance of, whether it is the department or even the individual. Achievable is a component because it cannot be irrational in nature. It has to be something which can be done, something which can be, really thought of. A proper plan can be made. It has to be realistic in its account. It cannot be unrealistic, something which cannot be achieved, which cannot be done. Time bound is a component which is very relevant because it has to be deadline oriented, because you are talking about an individual or a department attaining these objectives. So if you're not setting certain kind of a benchmark, certain kind of a timeline, for them, that this is when you have to achieve it, it will not work, and you will not, definitely not be able to assess the performance. It is, the MBOs, they are very, very, they promote a lot of participative approach, because it advocates those kind of, specificity. They say it has to be measurable. And of course, MBOs require a lot of feedback. So the implication is that, it will be effective only if you provide real-time feedback to your employees. When individuals are, consulted in the creation of their own goals, sorry, it often results mostly, in workers setting a goal that stretches them far off, and it really becomes very motivating and energizing for them. The MBO does not require, the individual workers to participate, however, but it is such a process, it's such a, exhaustive process, that it is definitely going to make the individuals be very, very active and be very vocal, and, understand that if there are unrealistic expectations, or, different kind of expectations which are coming up, which are certainly not rational in its component, then they can give their feedback. Okay. Now, mostly the problem behind these MBOs failing is that generally, Peter Drucker himself, has said that it will work only if we understand it properly. Most of the time, the problem is that MBOs don't work, is that people don't understand it, what actually it is. What you see here in the slide is one such, it's a very ironical description which has been given here, that if you see, the objectives are totally unambiguous. It's really not very, very clear. And it says that, you need to improve the company's performance. Now, it's very, very contextual. It is definitely not specific in nature. So the moment this kind of an objective or a goal is made at the top level, it percolates down to the division or the department level. You see that statements like, I want to see a significant improvement in this division's profits, or, increase profits regardless of the means. Now, these kind of very, very, you know, statements which can be interpreted in multiple manner, so there is definitely no clarity. The vision is there, but it is not clear. As it comes down and as it percolates down and it reaches the bottommost level at an individual level, don't worry about the quality, just work fast, because here it's more about that we have to achieve the profit, we have to see the profit regardless. That is how the department conveys it to the individual. So generally it's not a very ideal scenario, but the sad part is that this is the reality, this is how mostly it functions. Okay. Now, here if you see certain kind of statements like, however you should be talking about teamwork, we end up saying individual effort. Mostly you should be saying we hope for, but we often reward. You have to talk about the, commitment to customer service. And then sometimes you end up giving statements which are not really very clear in nature. Now, this SWOT analysis is something which is important. It is also one of the key planning tools managers have, at their disposal. Because SWOT analysis is relevant, it's important. SWOT, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So for an organization, conducting such an analysis really, provides a means of projecting expectations, one, anticipating problems, two, guiding the decision making, three. So it's a combination of all these things. So SWOT analysis, if we say, there are some external and some internal factors which become very, very important and relevant here. So the external factors, which mostly include opportunities and threats that are outside of the organization. So they are generally combined as external factors. These are the ones that the company may be able to influence, or at least anticipate, but they cannot fully control. They'll not be able to control it. At the max, what they can do is anticipate it, understand it. External factors, can be, let's say, technology innovation, it can be a competition, it can be the trends, government rules and regulations. Now you as a business entity have no control over these things, legal judgments, etc. Internal factors, if you see, now this is important because they are your strengths and your weaknesses, which are mostly within the organization. So factors like, let's say, the financial resources, technical, and of course the capabilities, the human resources, your product line. Now these are in your control. You can very well manipulate it. You can exercise control. You can create some kind of checks and balance. Since the company, has the most control over it, so it can develop a lot of strategies also to exploit the strengths and address the weaknesses. So it becomes very clear that, you are trying to understand that my human resources are my strength. How do I really exploit, not in terms of literal sense of exploitation, but how do I ensure that I optimally utilize my human resources? Benefit of a SWOT analysis is huge because it gives a manager a clear picture of the situation in which it operates and mostly helps them to develop very realistic plans. Managers have to be continuously scanning the internal and external business environment for any kind of a sign of change that may require different kind of alterations to their plan. So it's very, very relevant. Every organization's strengths and weakness, they evolve over time. New threats, new opportunities can appear out of the blue, something which you did not really thought of, you did not anticipate it also. Ignoring signals that technology, changing consumer expectations or legal requirements, many times they leave the business in a very inferior position as compared to their competitors. So for that purpose, it is generally advised to be on the lookout of, doing some kind of an analysis, understanding what are your opportunities and threats which are existing. It's a very essential tool, SWOT analysis, because it can be used to make a lot of informed and very rational decision making. And planning, of course, can be done on a regular basis. So, with all these kind of aspects, if we understand, planning per se is, it's a pervasive aspect. It's everywhere, narrow, specific, broad, any kind, and it is very, very crucial to fulfilling the other functions of management. So, without any plan, effective organizing, leading, and controlling will never take place. Failure to plan or even postpone it can really be a real liability, for managers, and it definitely starts affecting the organization. On that note, I end my topic. Thank you very much.